Nyack. It's a small waterfront village located just off New York's Tappan Zee Bridge, bordering both the Hudson River and Hook Mountain, two popular natural landmarks in Rockland County. With a population of roughly 8,000, the name Nyack resonates quietly yet fondly. It is a town filled with beautiful scenery, the arts, and, of course, industry. Nyack is the art and soul of the Hudson. To an observer unfamiliar with Nyack's history, food seems to be its most prominent attraction. Restaurants and cafes draw in cyclists and tourists from New York City who seek to escape their busy lives in a more quaint yet diverse town. But despite its positive outside image, Nyack has undergone major changes in just the past century alone. Underneath the surface is a web of problems that have only continued to grow, stemming from both broad societal changes and problems with the town itself. The business sector in Nyack is a prime example of this, as an intersection for the social, economic, and political challenges Nyack has faced over the years. This documentary seeks to examine Nyack's prosperity, decline, and possible renewal from the very beginning all the way to present day. This is Nyack's business sector. So, hello.
Hello.
What is your name and what is your profession?
My name is Winston Perry. I'm a retired architect. I worked as an architect for 55 years. In my retirement, I've been following my hobbies, one of which is local history.
In 1675, Herman Does, a 20-year-old Dutchman and the first known white settler in all of Rockland County, moved in on land purchased by his father. It was a large piece of land, home to a band of the Lenape Nation that lived there before European colonization, and who named the land Nyack, or the fishing place.
The first settlers were farmers. The first land grant covered what later became the three villages of Nyack. They took it over from the Tappan, who been in this area for thousands of years. And there were apparently the Nyacks who were refugees from Coney Island, which had been their ancestral home until it was taken over by the Dutch, and the Tappans let them come here.
The popularity of the land came from its proximity to the Hudson River. For the Native Americans, the river provided a steady food source, while for European settlers, they saw wealth in its shipbuilding and trade opportunities.
Cornelius Kuiper had the land grant for all of Nyack, divided it among his children, and his children divided it among their children. Each slice went from the river to the top of the mountain, so that by the time of the American Revolution, there were 12 farms in the Nyacks.
Like many Dutch immigrants at the time, Herman Does adopted the last name Tallman to sound more English. Today, we can see the Tallman family honored all around Nyack, such as the apartment complex Tallman Towers and even Tallman Avenue.
Settlers spoke Dutch for a long time. This was kind of a quiet backwater community. Most of the action was in New Amsterdam and New York City, and everything here happened about 20 years later than it happened there. And very little changed for the first 150 years.
Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the Lenape. Many parts of their history were erased. In the school district themselves, until recently, a stereotype of Native Americans was used as a school mascot. Only recently has Nyack finally begun to adopt projects that honor Native American culture respectfully. One of these projects, still here, Women of the Ramapo Lenape Nation, was an outdoor art installation by Nyack artist Lisa Lovart under the guidance of grandmother Clara Soaring Hawk. Using one of the original 6 farms of Upper Nyack, the project sought to prompt visitors to reflect upon the Lenape, who had long cared for the land before Dutch and other European colonizers. Fast forwarding an entire century, the American Revolution was in full swing. In 1775, 12 farms made up Nyack. There was no downtown, just 100 to 200 acre plots owned by heirs of the Tallman and Cooper families. The Coopers owned what later became known as Upper Nyack. During the American Revolution, Nyack fought their fair share of battles, mostly defense from British ships, who sought Nyack as a vantage point to later attack New York City. As the Revolution began to draw to a close in 1785, artisans and other skilled laborers poured into Nyack due to the discovery of red sandstone.
It was a soft stone that was easily worked. It occurred in veins, the outcroppings, quite close to the river, so it was easy to load it onto sloops. It was just a very handy material to work with.
Red sandstone, a material found very close to waterfront areas, began to attract high demand. This was due to it being a popular building material for architectural projects in New York City. Nyack, who had been using it to build their infrastructure, began to capitalize on it. Between 1780 and 1883, 31 quarries were in operation that employed over 200 men. It became one of Nyack's first thriving businesses. Looking to take advantage of the Hudson in 1798, John Van Houten bought farmland in Upper Nyack, establishing a shipyard and boat service to New York City. With a thriving economy starting to be cultivated in this lower part of the Hudson River, it began to attract entrepreneurs. In 1813, Tunis and Peter Smith bought 5 acres of what would later become Nyack's Main Street. They sold lots and helped create a community focused on shipbuilding and transportation and can be considered the earliest founders of business in Nyack.
The Smiths promoted the growth of the village, along with John Green, who partnered with them in many of their enterprises.
This sudden success brought with it the need for more stores, so in 1814 the Tallman Mill was built. The Tallman Mill utilized the Nyack Brook, a small stream that runs down the hills of the town. This manufacturing attracted carpenters, blacksmiths, cobblers, shipbuilders, and all people skilled in trade. With this influx in skilled laborers moving to Nyack, even more homes and stores were needed to support this construction.
The first that I know of was Abraham Tallman, was a tavern keeper, a place where people could stay over if their sloop was delayed by a calm spell or adverse tides. So there were boarding houses and lodgings of various sorts. The other businesses that developed, there was an early sawmill, carpentry shops, cabinet makers, window sash makers, and lots of food markets and clothing stores, dry goods stores. It quickly became a well-rounded and diverse community.
By 1826, several thousand single-family homes would be built within walking distance of jobs, shopping, schools, and transportation. There were 3 main causes of Nyack's early economic success: the river, the mountains, and the brook. The river provided Nyack with immense trade opportunities. In 1826, the Nyack Steamboat Association formed a $10,000 contract with Henry Genser, an accomplished shipbuilder at the time, to build a 75-foot-long steamboat named the Orange. Using the Hudson River, the Orange would transport goods created in Nyack and replace the old cargo vessels.
Henry Gessner was a shareholder in it and actually the builder of the Orange. When steamboats came along in the 1820s, that was much more faster and more dependable than the sailing sloops into New York City and up and down the river. It made Nyack grow very fast.
With this, among many others, Nyack became one of the largest economic sectors in Rockland County. The river also provided recreational activities such as sailing, drawing more people to Nyack. The mountains represent the town's unique views. It drew in tourists and eventual residents from around New York State, which led to more spending in Nyack's economy. Because of its unique waterfront location, wealthier landowners began to buy up property in Nyack, only increasing its allure.
Geography played a factor in it, in that there is a dip in the Palisades range of hills that now the Thruway and Route 59 go through it.
Finally, the largest part of Nyack that contributed to its success was the brook, a small stream mostly hidden from view that runs throughout the village's downtown. It gave strength to its manufacturers who used it to power their mills. On July 12, 1826, William H. Perry started Nyack's first shoemaking business, which became its first manufacturing industry.
The retail business served local residents and probably served most of Rockland County. Everybody's got 2 feet and needs a lot of shoes.
At first, it was a hand operation, then became mechanized, then power operated thanks in part to the Nyack Brook. 2 years later, Perry moved to Main Street, employing 10 to 12 men and encouraging other manufacturers to move to Nyack. This was succeeded by William E. Tuttle in 1876, whose manufacturing company employed 20 men and produced 1,750 shoes per week. These businesses would continue to employ hundreds in Nyack, gaining it the nickname Shoetown, a shining example of its strong business sector and economy. These 3 combined had a profound effect on the village. By 1876, Nyack contained 145 stores, among these 14 grocery stores, 7 shoe stores, and 5 hotels. In 1886, after Nyack incorporated, the population was officially registered as 3,249 people, a far cry from the few families that had dominated Nyack only a few decades earlier. Because of this also came a political shift. Before the introduction of artisans, Nyack had been in the hands of a few wealthy conservative landowners. However, according to Frank Green, a writer for the Rockland County Journal at the time, it has now become my province to deal with it in a different way, to show how little by little, Nyack has changed from a conservative community to a liberal village. The rapid growth of Nyack, not only economically, but socially, is not something that can be overstated, transforming a few hundred-acre conservative farms into tens of thriving liberal businesses. At a population of 4,444, Nyack seemed like it was stronger than ever. Then, in the late 1920s, the Great Depression hit with the crash of the US stock market. This was an economic recession never seen before and affected businesses and communities the country over, Nyack included. Complaints were filed over the next 10 years relating to the cleanliness of the town, its sidewalks, and a large increase in dilapidated housing. One complaint would read, "Mud holes and pitfalls greet the pedestrian on every hand. In some parts of town, you cannot walk a block without seeing rubbish, papers, and cans in the streets and gutters."
Nyack has seen a lot of ups and downs. Many business owners lost their businesses during the Depression. I was born in 1933, and it was still kind of depressed in my childhood. There were a lot of vacant stores.
Nyack tried to stave off the effects of the Great Depression through improvements to sidewalks and streets handled by the Works Progress Administration, a New Deal agency created by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt that employed millions of those who had lost their jobs to carry out public works projects. However, this wasn't enough. In 1955, the opening of the Tappan Zee Bridge spelt more trouble. While the creation of bridges to connect communities helped Rockland County to become the fastest growing county in the metropolitan region, widespread suburban development began to radically alter the landscape of Nyack. Many people who lived in Nyack now began to travel to the city for work. As a result, retail shopping areas were turned into suburban housing, driving the property values in Nyack up even higher than they already were. As people were spending less time and therefore money in Nyack, stores and other manufacturers began to move closer to these highways to take advantage of this new government project. But unfortunately, this left many stores vacant and became a self-fulfilling prophecy of businesses being scared away due to the fears of lost business. Small towns like Nyack were paved over to make way for the highway. The effects were apparent. According to a US census in 1950, 1 in 5 buildings in Nyack were classified as substandard, and 173 were considered dilapidated. For a population of around 4,000, these numbers were troubling. At the same time, falling property rates on Main Street helped disenfranchised minority residents, who had long been struggling to stay afloat in Nyack's suffocating real estate market. These places weren't as coveted as the waterfront properties, often cheap and substandard, but for many, it allowed them to have their own home. The loss of business and the substandard houses of Main Street led Nyack in 1957 to become one of the first adopters of the urban renewal plan. The now controversial Urban Renewal Plan was an attempt by the federal government to offer loans and other grants to communities who in exchange would redevelop their downtowns to restore economic vitality.
The local businessmen felt that they were losing out to malls and strip malls that had big parking lots, convenient parking, and that their problems might be solved if they had a big central parking lot. It took advantage of a federal program which offered to pay a large part of the cost of so-called improvements to the village.
Applying for this program would allow the money to go towards attracting outside manufacturers and small businesses, as well as improving aging infrastructure. Among those listed in Nyack's village-wide development plan included parking, improvements to the Nyack Brook, and revitalization of Main Street. However, the results would be far from how the village board had envisioned. In 1963, demolition and reconstruction began. To redevelop Main Street, Nyack needed to remove those currently living in the area. To do this, they used eminent domain, a law that allows towns to remove owners from their property as long as they receive fair compensation. However, they rarely actually did.
Their property was bought theoretically for the fair market value, but that was never sufficient to allow them to buy other buildings. There was nothing in their price range available in the community. People whose homes were taken felt that it was done intentionally to move them out, and that was certainly the effect that it had.
Nyack seized over 100 buildings, 80 structures were demolished, and 127 families were displaced, 22 of whom owned their homes. 79% of those displaced were black, despite Nyack being only 18% black at the time.
The perhaps unforeseen or perhaps foreseen effect was that the area needed for the parking lot happened to be where most of the minority people in the community lived. Some people had enough foresight to perceive that it was benefiting the whites and hurting the blacks and other minorities. Other people went along with it innocently, not realizing what the effect was going to be.
In 1965, when asked what would happen to those displaced by the plan, village trustee Herbert Swaim replied, "We are not a welfare organization and not elected to be one." There were two main parts to the urban renewal. Despite Herbert Swaim's comments, requirements in the urban renewal stated that housing needed to be built for those displaced. To quickly satisfy these requirements, the village built the Waldron Terrace for low-income families and the Tallman Towers, as well as Nyack Plaza for middle-income housing. In 1964, the first commercial building, the Tappan Zee Bank, was reopened. It would remain the only building for 8 years after demolition.
The village had to find a commercial sponsor, but even so, it took years to find any real estate investors interested in undertaking the sponsorship of a project in Nyack.
By 1966, finding tenants to move into these stores proved difficult. The village had built the stores, but forgot to include a back door for deliveries, which was a serious downside in convincing new merchants to move to Nyack. The village also remained focused on the idea of a magnet store, that one store was needed to attract merchants and others willing to spend money. In a strange decision, it was decided that no local merchants would be considered for a magnet store. However, the board took so long that many magnet stores and businesses moved to other locations, leaving many plots empty and turned into parking space.
There were different targets that people thought they could bring to Nyack, but most all of them had a marketing analysis tool that showed that their customers would only come from a semicircular area this side of the river. And whereas if they went to Nanuet, they'd get customers from a full circular area. I think that analysis persuaded most larger stores to bypass Nyack.
Eventually, other businesses attempted to move in but were unable to survive.
The building that's now a small supermarket was a very interesting case because it was originally built as a double-deck, 2 stories of retail shops plus a theater. Most of the tenants were unsuccessful, and the theater didn't last long.
Other works projects included in the application, such as improvements made to the Nyack Brook to prevent flooding, were never fully realized. Although no official numbers were ever stated, the cost far exceeded the original grant given. The results of the urban renewal are highly contested in Nyack. Some sources believe that it provided adequate relocation, much needed parking space, and, if only temporarily, provided new life to the town. Others believe that the project displaced many minority residents living in Nyack and failed to revitalize Main Street.
It was only slightly successful. The large parking lot was created, and that has made it possible for retail businesses to continue somewhat shakily in the downtown area of Nyack. But it took years to accomplish. The whole urban renewal area was pretty small and didn't offer any very attractive sites, so it was pretty mediocre.
It is undeniable, however, that this program brought great change that residents were not expecting, putting Nyack in a vulnerable state. Even with many stores vacant due to the Great Depression, by the 1970s, Nyack began finding success again through antique stores.
We used to call Broadway south of the library and post office Antique Row because practically all the shops were antique shops. And people flocked to the area.
Antique stores focused on taking advantage of the rich history and culture of the town, bringing in tourists from the city. This also led to Nyack's own art movement, and is now home to a theater, an art cafe, and tens of custom art shops.
People flocked to the area to shop for antiques or just to stroll around and look at them.
Friends of the Nyacks, a civics group organized in 1974, promoted pride in village architecture, history, antiques, and arts and crafts shops. With this, Nyack's economy began to turn around. However, it was distinctly different. 53% of sales in Nyack were either in the food or automotive business. Nyack had changed to cater more to tourists than the needs of its community.
There were other quaint old towns in the Hudson Valley and elsewhere that were competing with Nyack, and the audience is kind of fickle. I guess it kind of died back.
Despite this attempt at revitalization, it was short-lived. In 1969, the shops at Nanuet opened, one of the many malls that began to dominate America in this time period. These malls contained chains and other businesses, as well as more recreational activities that the traditional town could not provide. As a result, many people opted to go to malls out of convenience rather than spending money in their own economy. Nyack took a huge hit financially, and this forced them further into catering to tourists.
Now we have lots of bars and restaurants. People come to Nyack to have a huge selection of many options.
The arrival of the Palisades Mall in 1998 was even closer and made it even easier for people to skip out on Nyack, even its own residents. On Main Street itself, large chains such as Starbucks and Walgreens have taken customers away from more local businesses.
The Walgreens drugstore is, of course, a rather recent addition to the local economy. I'm still a loyal Cobblin supporter. My wife and I get our meds there, and some of our household supplies. And I'm very concerned about that because we get a kind of personal service from the staff there because they know us. And we would hate to lose them. I think they've shown that they can survive, but I'm sure that it's a tough row to hoe, as they say.
This significantly contributes to less growth and therefore less circulation of money in the business sector. And with the rise of online shopping sites such as Amazon, convenience has overtaken spending money in the local economy.
What caused the manufacturing business to rather suddenly die out, I don't know. I guess other factories elsewhere were more modern, more mechanized, more mass production, and could make better shoes cheaper.
At the end of the century, Nyack, once known as Shoe Town, did not have a shoe store, a supermarket, or a department store. For many years, Nyack continued on this slow downward trend. Then, in 2020, COVID-19 shook the world, Nyack included. Facing the height of stores closing due to the pandemic, Nyack Mayor Don Hammond created a business council to strengthen business and hold community events. Landlords also shaved 10 to 20% off store listing prices to offer incentives to create businesses in Nyack. This has become part of the Visit Nyack initiative, along with the tagline Art and Soul on the Hudson, attracting tourists with its promise of recreational activities and good deals.
Maybe just reflecting my own opinion, I think he's doing a great job. I think his values are similar to mine, and he's likable. There's only so much a village can do to support its businesses and citizens, but I think the current administration is doing very well.
The surge has finally started to break through in 2023. Now, more organizations are being recognized in Nyack. In 2005, the Nyack Parks Conservancy was created to develop new recreational activities. Continuing into the pandemic, the MPC has raised funds to create new basketball courts, children's playgrounds, butterfly garden, skate park, and splash pad at Memorial Park in Nyack. They have also funded scholarships for Nyack's recreational programs and regularly host events such as Music on the Hudson, fostering creativity and more socially active residents in Nyack. More businesses have begun to move into Nyack as well.
Seems like always a lot of eager young entrepreneurs who think they have the answer to successful retailing, who set up a new shop, and they're always very attractive. A few of them last, and many of them don't. But it creates a lively, interesting place.
More than a dozen new businesses have been welcomed into Nyack since 2020, including a shopping center named Nyack Fresh Market, taking part of the parking space that was once to be the Magnet store.
That building that was there was finally allowed when people had pretty much given up on a Magnet store.
Long Path Outfitters, another new business, provides gear for hiking enthusiasts, but has also expanded to guided tours that connect people to Hook Mountain.
Hook Mountain is a national natural landmark, which is a big deal. Very few towns have such a significant physical feature to point to.
These improvements continue to breathe new life into the community and encourage more tourists to visit Nyack. Although the village is still in its beginning stages of revitalization, Nyack is looking to return to the river, the mountains, and the brook.
I met my wife in Berkeley, California, and we love Berkeley. And I think Nyack shares many of the same attributes that make Berkeley a great place. Great mixture of different kinds of people, but a generous sprinkling of people with liberal points of view. We get to see the sunrise. In Berkeley, we get to see the sunset. So I would, in a word, say, well, 3 words, that Nyack is like Berkeley on the Hudson.
While Nyack is only one town of many, it is a perfect representation of what many current small town communities are facing today. By being aware of the history of Nyack, understanding how it has affected the town today, and trying to make change through petitions or even just by supporting your local businesses, we can build a better future for all towns across America.
How could people, especially kids in Nyack, become more interested in our history?
The Historical Society of the Nyaks and the Historical Society of Rockland County are all eager for young volunteers and would welcome high school students and other young people and offer a variety of volunteer activities that they could participate in. They're not too good at offering those opportunities, and maybe we need some younger minds to suggest more of them. But I think that's an area that could be explored.
If you live in Nyack, by sharing this with your family or your friends, you can help build more awareness and a more conscious community that is better equipped to deal with whatever new challenges may come our way. If you're from outside Nyack, do research into your own town, see how it's affected your community today, and spread the word, because the more people that know, the more people can push towards a better future.